Hi, this is Daniela Cambone, and welcome back to the Daniela Cambone Show and our Outlook 2025 series. Joining me is the author that took the financial world by storm with his first book, The Great Taking. It's still haunting me today. Please welcome back to the program, David Webb. David, so good to see you.
Daniela, very, very nice seeing you. And I want to thank you for, that interview. It was a very significant one. Thank you. And thanks for having me back.
Yeah, absolutely. It was significant. The video obviously went viral, and here we are 1 year later, David. Uh, I want to talk about how life has changed for you since The Great Taking, the launch of that book, which you say it's not a finance book, it's not an investment book. It's really about the spiritual dilemmas we face. So we're going to get into it.
Yeah.
But first, how has life been for you?
A lot has happened. Let's put it that way. A lot has happened. So 1 month after the next, a lot has happened all year. We can talk about that, but coming into the year, I thought, well, what should I do? And I thought the first thing I should do is go visit Ed Griffin. You're close with Ed. I was working with a filmmaker, James Patrick. He did Planet Lockdown, Nitrogen 2000. He has a CBDC film coming out. And, of course, there was the documentary on the Great Taking had been released about this time last year, early December, late November. And James and I decided, well, what should we do going forward? We should document the resistance effort to the Great Taking. So the first step was going to see G. Edward Griffin. This was in Northern California. And really, en route, we discovered that this bill was coming in South Dakota. So we had to change our travel arrangements and figure out how to get from Ed Griffin's to Pierre, South Dakota in early February, which was not easy. It actually took a couple of days to get there. So the important thing about that is this bill that was brought, that happened without my involvement. This is the power of the what has been disclosed in that book, is that other people pick this up and they carry the ball now.
Let me just stop you there, and let's just go a little deeper there for people who may not be familiar with The Great Taking. And by the way, G. Edward Griffin, national treasure, author of The Creature from Jekyll Island, which has been the foundation, many great minds, including Dr. Ron Paul. Your book, basically in a nutshell, talks about how you could really lose it all. How what you own, from the cash in the bank to your car to your house, the possibility that it could be seized and taken by the government. The focus point of your book is really Article 8 of the Uniform Commercial Code, the U.C.C., correct?
Yes. Well, I would say it's not a taking by the government. It is a taking by secured creditors of within the financial system. And this is the shocking thing, not your secured creditors. It's not based on money that you have borrowed. It's the creditors of entities that have secretly used your property as their collateral. So it's not the government. This is really the very biggest banks that will take the property. And further, what I'm really talking about here, it's not a financial matter per se. It is part of a global hybrid war strategy, and it's ultimately about subjugation of populations, and just one component of this hybrid war.
So in 1994, just to give some more background, the concept of a security entitlement holder was introduced in Article 8 of the U.C.C., the Uniform Commercial Code. The UCC is a standardized set of regulations that has now been adopted as law in all 50 states. Historically, whatever securities you own legally were yours. You had personal property rights, and therefore you were protected. But what changed is that they severed those personal property rights and instead introduced this concept of a security entitlement. So basically, we don't really have legal ownership, and that is massive, because how many of us, before your book, David, even knew about this?
Yeah, I would say up until recently, even top securities attorneys at banks did not understand this. It's just astounding, really, but that that is the case. People just hadn't parsed through the whole thing to understand the implications. Even very sophisticated people um, have not understood this. But it's clear, especially now after a year, this is irrefutable. It's been thoroughly examined, and we can talk about what has happened as we've encountered the banking lobby in these efforts in the states, and that has been important vetting of this and exposition.
I'd love to talk about that. And getting back to South Dakota and Tennessee, you say, well, would you say you're indirectly part of that change that's happening there?
Oh, well, what's happening in the States is it happened as a direct result of the book. The key lawyer that is working on this is Don Grandy. He saw the book a year ago in December as the result of a Zero Hedge article. He downloaded the PDF. As he said, he read it and thought to himself, this guy is crazy. And then he uh, pulled all the references, spent 2 weeks, went through it all, and then decided we have to do something about this. Now, our great good fortune is that his wife, Betty Grandy, she's a very experienced state legislator. She had 18 years in the North Dakota legislature. And when she timed out as a legislator, she became involved in working with legislators all across the country. So they're kind of a husband wife team that do the legal support for legislators. They were already in touch with over 200 legislators across the country. They are working with something called the Pro Family Legislative Network, family issues, and they decided this is a family issue. If your property is taken and you're left destitute, that could be bad for your family. So we're going to take that on. So they began that effort without having talked with me, and but then they got in touch, and so James, Patrick, and I fit that in. We went directly to South Dakota from G. Edward Griffin's in February, and
Wow.
and then the next month, a bill came in Tennessee. We were there for that. Then we were really toward the end of the legislative season. In June, we were at the Red Pill with Ed Griffin in Rapid City, South Dakota. And then in Oklahoma, there was a study in October. Oklahoma will be advancing legislation on this. And just last month in November, we were at a meeting in Dallas where we met with 183 state legislators. There was intense interest in this. So it's happening.
So it's happening. So, when you set out to write the book, was this your intent, David? Did you think that it would have this impact and is making this incredible change?
Uh, well, it was my hope, but I didn't know how it would come about. I I knew I knew that this had been done in state law. This had been implemented. Local law had to be subverted to do this because this is also what I saw in Sweden. This is how They subverted the law in Europe. It is the model. It has to be done at the local level. So it needs to be reversed in local law. So I had started speaking about that it should be reversed in local law, and then it happened. People started working on it.
Wow. It's like manifestation at its highest level.
Well, it has been like that. It's a miracle. To me, Don and Betty Grandy are a miracle. And what is
We
happening?
need to get them on the show.
Well, yeah, yeah, that would be great. That would be great.
Um, so I sense you're optimistic that change will come, that this could be, uh,
Oh, yes.
that this could create a domino effect.
It
I mean, do
is.
you need all states to adopt it?
Well, no, no. So let me say what's going to happen imminently. There are bills are coming in South Dakota, Tennessee, North Dakota, Iowa, New Hampshire, Oklahoma, Utah, probably Texas. The legislator that has an illness in the family in Texas, but I think that will come along. Arkansas, and the list goes on. Don and Betty have talked with legislators in over 20 states that are interested. So, but we know there are actual bills coming in upwards of 10 states. This is happening now. Now, the importance is if this is advanced in it would be difficult for perhaps one state to overcome the banking lobby doing it alone. But by having multiple states advancing this at the same time, it's going to be difficult for the bankers to overcome. There are also efforts to establish transactional gold happening at the same time in Texas, Tennessee, Oklahoma, Utah, Kansas, Arkansas. At the same time, there is legislation to prevent central bank digital currency from being used at the state level. So all of these things are drawing the ire of the banking lobby.
Of course, I would think so. That's my next question because it was very creative how the banks, the brokerage firms, the clearing corporations were able to achieve this. That they've done they've done this by pooling the securities together, um, and making you no longer protect your specific rights. So they were very creative in how they went about getting this in.
Yes.
So I would think the opposition from the banks would be huge. And
Well, it's
aren't
huge.
they very powerful, David?
Yes. Well, this is historic what has happened. So I'll just give you the flavor. In South Dakota, the way they stopped this was procedural tactics. So there was a subcommittee hearing. They really allowed the sponsor of the bill and Don Grandy very little time to speak. And then they allowed 8 banking lobbyists to say that there's nothing to see here. and and then so the committee voted against advancing the bill. Then there was such strong support on the part of legislators that they were able to force it back onto the floor of the House. And then again, from the leadership of the House, they prevented discussion of the bill on the floor. They said, this has been heard in committee, it's been examined, stop wasting the people's time. And it called for an immediate vote. They had the votes to suppress it. So that happened. Then in Tennessee, it was a much different story. In the subcommittee, there was a subcommittee hearing in the House, and the bill, we were up against 2 banking lobbyists, one of whom was Andrew Guggenheim, who is the chief counsel for the Securities Industry Financial Markets Association. He's one of their big guns to bring in, and what we found was that they really they could not refute this. What they said was there's been no change in property rights, which is absolutely false. And secondly, they claim that this is about margin accounts, to allow people to have margin accounts. Um, but if you go in and you look at the language that is in the U.C.C. now, it's about secured creditors of the intermediaries, not secured creditors of people who borrowed money against their securities. So that does not stand up either. So the committee questioned particularly Andrew Guggenheim at length, and then they voted 6-1 in favor of advancing the bill. That is the first time ever that a legislature has pushed back against the wishes of the banking lobby. This is historic. They then accelerated the hearing of the bill in the Senate to the next day. It had not been scheduled so that Don Grandy and I could both be there easily. We wouldn't have to fly back. And the next day, the bill was passed unanimously in the Senate committee. And the really significant thing is that in the Senate, the Republican majority leader of the Senate voted in favor of this bill. And the day before in this House subcommittee, the Democrat chairman of the Black Caucus was one of the main people questioning Andrew Guggenheim. So after this vote in the Senate, Betty Grandy leaned forward to me and she said, this now has national implications because it's a nonpartisan issue. It's a people
Wow.
against the banking lobby, against the banking interests. So Don and I then there was a full committee hearing in the House that it had to clear the next week, and Don and I stayed for that, and we started on Monday meeting every member of that committee. And the first day was very receptive. The second day, something had changed, and people were actually frightened that something had changed. And what had changed was the banking lobby had gone to the treasurer of the state of Tennessee and threatened the state with withdrawal of financial services if this
Wow.
passed.
Why
So,
wasn't this in all the national papers?
well, I think the public doesn't control the national papers. That's
So, David, before I didn't mean to interrupt you, but just to get back to what you were saying, they went to lobby the Tennessee Treasury.
the treasurer has a lot of responsibility. And I think he's a good man. And we met. He was basically saying this is a big step to take, and we need time to study this. It needs to be studied. The next day, there was the full hearing, and in that hearing, and it's just priceless. This is the value of the exposition of having advanced these bills to see what the banking lobby has to say. They made the arguments that there's been no change in property rights and that this is about margin accounts, which are manifestly untrue. But then they went on and said, if you do this, no financial service firm will do business in the state. They will not do business with any other firm that will do business in the state. And for good measure, they said this would be bad for the Depository Trust Corp. So why would you do it? And this is on film. This is recorded. So after that, they did not advance the bill. You know, they said we have to have a summer study on this, but then they did not have the summer study. Um,
Mm.
there was a claim that the room was being refurbished where the summer study would have been done. So, so they did not do the summer study. Don
Oh no.
there for that. But what has happened, there is such momentum about this in so many states that as the bill is coming back in Tennessee, the treasurer talked with um, probably New York law firms, and they basically say, well, if you do this, there could be problems. But when pressed, they cannot specify what the problem would be. So the treasurer has said, I won't prevent the bill from being progressed. So it is going to get a hearing.
Okay, so I mean, I think this story sheds so much light. First of all, it makes me optimistic personally that there's still people with a conscience working in government, in legislature, David, because we often hear so much about the bad apples and all the wrongdoings. This is giving me hope.
The difference is, and this is very important for people to understand, they are drawn into putting all their energy into watching what happens at the federal level, which is a circus. And that is designed to trap people's energy and for them to stay on the sofa thinking that someone else is going to handle this. The only way to change things is at the local level. It has to happen from the bottom up. And we absolutely can do this. Why? Because the state legislators are regular people. They are people
Mm.
work full-time jobs. They do not have staffs. For example, in New Hampshire, the total compensation is $100 a year to a legislator. So these are not people that are there for the money. They are there for the right reason. And of course, for them to discover either in work in advancing this U.C.C. Article 8, changing this to reverse
No.
priority to investors, when encountering the banking lobby in that, or on these other issues, transactional gold or CBDC, it is a real eye opener for these people. And it comes as maybe a surprise to the banking lobbyists. People do not like being threatened. And so it's a little counterproductive when they start showing what they're about. And that's why this is not going to be stoppable. But having said that, the very important thing, we have a crack legal team supporting all these state legislators. But Don and Betty are going to have to get to maybe over 20 states, twice over.
Wow.
And
And they're not paid for this, right, David? Like, who's
they're
funding
not
this?
paid, and it's probably going to cost over $100,000 just airfare, hotel. We have the advantage that they're married, so they will have one hotel room, but we need people to support this effort because it is so actionable and actionable right now. And I'll explain how neatly this can be done. Um, but the main thing, and maybe we'll come back to this, people need to go to truenorthpublicpolicy.com, and that's
Okay.
TRU with no E, True North Public Policy, no E. And that is the entity that Don has set up to garner support for this, their costs to do this in all these states. I cover my own expenses. All the proceeds from the book is going to True North. And but we need to, they shouldn't have to have a bake sale to to do this, because this is what will turn the country, really. And
Wow.
it's important for the entire world. So let me explain how neatly this can be done. And
Hmm.
Don developed this approach when, so the value of having brought the bill, one, when people see that it's been brought in a bill, it makes it real for them. Secondly, it draws attention to the specific language in Article 8 of the U.C.C. And then people see, including the legislators, how this subterfuge was put in place. And the way it was done, in the first instance, it says that the entitlement holders have priority over the secured creditors of the intermediaries. And that is what was stated in the accompanying statement when this amendment to the U.C.C. was being implemented in the mid 90s. The assurance was given that this assures that the entitlement holders have priority, but they omitted in that statement that there were two exceptions. This is the same thing the banking lobbyists did in North Dakota, for example. They would read the first instance, but not mention the exceptions. This is the subterfuge. So, what are the exceptions? The first one is that if the secured creditor of the intermediary has control, the secured creditor has priority. Now, control is a concept from bankruptcy law, which means the creditor has the ability to act on the asset, to sell the asset. And what we know from what you were saying at the beginning, when we had certificates, the public was absolutely bulletproof because it was legally your property. It was a chattel. The financial system could become completely insolvent and your property was not at risk. They were out of business, but your property could not be taken. So what has been done through these very sneaky changes is that certainty of control of that property has now been severed for the owner, and the certainty has been passed elsewhere. So the only thing you know is that you do not have legal control of the property. It is elsewhere in the system that control resides. So this exception, this loophole is not something that's used once in a while. It is used all the time, 100% of the time. The second exception is that if the creditor is a creditor of a clearing entity, those secured creditors always have priority. So what are clearing entities? Lehman Brothers was a clearing entity. Goldman Sachs is a clearing entity. And importantly, all of the central clearing counterparties, it's in the name, where the derivatives complex is cleared, those are all clearing entities. So these are both massive loopholes that are operative all the time. So what Don's approach was simply to strike those two exceptions. This is the elegance of it. So now it just says the investor has priority over the secured creditors of the intermediary, period. And the banking lobby will have you believe that frogs will fall from the sky if you strike those two exceptions. Why? Because they're using the property. So it also smokes them out, it exposes them. Why can't we strike these two things? And they cannot explain directly. It is an elegant way, it is actionable. We absolutely can do this. It is not a complicated process. It really exposes the issue just by advancing these bills. And we find that the legislators really understand this. And it draws the battle lines. It focuses everyone on who the real enemy is that is controlling everything behind the scenes.
Amazing.
Yeah.
It's amazing. The question, I have so many questions, but if the bank, if they lose this power, this immense power that they're already using, because it's not like there's a master plan to just unleash everything one day and take everything from everyone. You're saying it's already in play. They're already manipulating the situation and using your property. So if they lose this power, what does the banking sector future look like? Does the house of
Well,
cards just come crumbling down? I mean,
no,
how much
no.
of a hit is it?
Yeah, that's important also. This is only, people do worry that, well, if you make this change, what could happen?
Yeah.
And the beauty of just striking these two exceptions is that nothing should happen. It doesn't change any of the plumbing of the system in terms of the indirect holding system. Um, it is only operative in the event of insolvency. And in that case, you will want to have made this change. So what it will do is it will force the banks um, to reduce leverage using someone else's assets. Um, and people think, well, couldn't that cause a collapse? That they would have to reduce leverage. And that's part of the insanity of this situation. We're basically being threatened in this way, but people should understand that, for example, in Europe, there's something called the Bank Resolution Authority that has these. Often there's more transparency in Europe on these things. Um, they don't try to hide it, and they have these planning cycle documents. So the one for 22 mandated that all the globally systemically important banks, the biggest banks, would be in a position to go flat on their derivatives books very quickly. And essentially, they would front run the market. And the 23 planning cycle documents, so last year, said we will have completed all of our preparations by the end of the year. So they can, they absolutely can wind down their derivatives exposures.
Um, David, as you're speaking, I'm thinking, talk about a life purpose. You have an incredible purpose. Um, how do you feel personally?
Uh, well, I mean, this is really a miracle that all this has happened in the past year. And we're dealing with something so big, the, there aren't words. If you said it's epic, that's not a big enough description of
I, I,
what
and I and I
what
know you were saying this has to happen at the local level. But as we're speaking, I was thinking, have you spoken to Dr. Ron Paul about this, or has Elon Musk heard about? I feel like this is something they'd be all over.
Well, I'm sure Dr. Paul would be sympathetic to what we're trying to do here. I'm sure of that. I don't know about Elon Musk, but I'm sure Dr. Paul would be. People eh, like Elon Musk, I think are aware of this. But there are things they're not going to touch. So that awareness is up at that level.
And this is part of our Outlook series, and I'm sure so many of my viewers are so grateful as I am for everything you've been doing to fight for us. But in the meantime, what is one to do? It could be years before if a change comes. So what should we be doing? I know we discussed it in part one, but as a refresher here, what should we be doing? Should we not be in the banks? I mean, we have to have some money in the banks. Obviously,
No.
people have to pay their bills and whatnot. But what are things we can do to take some power and control back in the meantime?
Yeah. The well, very simply, um, I say to people, anything you have in the financial markets is vulnerable in the event of insolvency. That's very clear. So you just have to be prepared that that is gone. And so, uh, I tell my wife we still have funds in a U.S. Treasury fund for liquid cash, but we know she understands that that can just be gone. Um, of course, we have money in the bank. You have to have something. The key is that you have a way to get through what really is a war. You have a number of years that you have to be very difficult years you have to be able to get through. So there are lessons from the Depression as to how people got through those times. And one of the most important things is not to have any debt. So to sell things while you can and pay off all your debts. Now, however, I worry about pushing people to do that because so many people are so heavily in debt that they would despair when facing that. And so I say to people, look, if for example, selling your house would destroy your family, destroy your marriage, destroy the happiness of your children. Don't Please don't do that. Well, we will get through this together. All your neighbors have high debt levels. The main thing is your physical security through some very difficult years. So if you're well
Mm.
established in a place with people around you that will support you, you look to your physical security. The so I mentioned this. I I guess I mentioned it in the documentary. I'm not sure if I do in the that my dad in our house that he had built in 1958. There was this square room in the basement with shelves all the way around it. My mother dutifully organized all the cans in there, and my grandfather's house had the same kind of room. And I asked my dad, why do we have this? And he said, well, people used to think you should have about a year's supply of food in the house. And I thought this was the 1960s. I thought, well, that's insane. Why do you need that? And he said, well, you could lose your job, you could get sick, and if you're not in debt, you can get through that. So that's how people got through these tough years in the Depression. And it's important for people to know that when they closed all the banks in 1933, they, 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 the apologists for the Fed want you to believe that everything got better after that. It was some kind of a miracle. Things got worse and worse year after year for the rest of the decade. So it's very difficult to get up off the mat once they shut down the financial system. So you have to prepare for something like that. So, if your spouse is on board with it and you would feel more less stress, people who have a big mortgage might sell their home and rent or move out into a more rural area and buy a smaller place, less expensive. There are people doing this sort of thing. Um, in terms of so physical assets are important. Not having intermediaries, very important. Um,
Do
real
you like physical gold, David?
Yeah, having real things. But again, you can't put everything in any one thing. I think you have to diversify in ways that you wouldn't have imagined before. Um, so it's I know gold is a good thing, but you can't eat gold. So you have to prepare to get through it physically as well.
And I know people always say, well, how far away do you think we are till those wheels come off? Um,
Well, it
you
will.
don't have a timeline, right, David?
Well, I think we're in it now. You know, the wheels will not come off because they have to come off. They will come off at a time of their choosing because there does not have to be a financial collapse. They have engineered this and they will make it happen when they choose to make it happen. And as when I was visiting with Ed Griffin, he said, "Well, of course this will not be done in isolation. It will happen when people are being threatened in so many ways that the last thing they're going to worry about is their IRA. They're worried about whether they're going to survive or not." So as Ed said, what would they do? And this is just, he's not saying this will happen, but he said, drop a bomb on Cincinnati, that something absolutely shocking that will terrify everyone. But I have to say to people, we are already well into this global hybrid war. Lots of people have been killed already. And so we're already at a point that is now it's being done quietly, but we're already at a point in terms of fatalities that is rivaling the world wars.
When you say people have been killed,
Well, I'm talking about, maybe you don't want to get into this, but it is
yeah,
it
I
is
think I know what.
then you have the war in Ukraine. Over 1 million Ukrainians have been killed, and now the escalating war in the Middle East. It's starting to look a lot like a global hybrid war. It's not a speculation, it's happening.
And I know you've seen the comments that President-elect Trump has vowed to stay out of it or wants the U.S. to stay out of it, but the U.S., as you know, David, may be forced into it.
Again, I will probably annoy a lot of people by saying that I don't think it matters uh, whether it's Trump or Obama or Hillary Clinton or George Bush or Biden. The same program goes forward regardless. And that is, I know there's a lot of very hopeful energy about uh, being able to change things here, and that energy is real. That's very important. The hopefulness of people. So what we do is not allow that energy to be trapped or misdirected or repurposed, frustrated. We have to use that energy now, and people have to understand over and over again, we have been tricked that into having this choice between only the Democrats or the Republicans with these awful candidates that somehow are the only people that could possibly be offered as candidates. And what it does is it allows people to stay on the sofa because they watch that horror show, and they feel that they've done something by voting. The only way to change things is through direct personal agency, and that is done at the local level. You can't expect the cavalry to ride to the rescue from the federal level.
And that's such an important message. And I think it gives a lot of hope. And I'd love to end this segment on that positive note, even though every time I speak with you, David, those words that you said to me the first time we spoke, still haunt me, that you were not afraid to take on this mission, this purpose. You told me because you aren't afraid to die.
Yeah, well,
because that is.
We should all understand, I'm a little older than you are, but we're all mortal. We have this idea that the universe revolves around my little persona. And this is the illusion that people live in, that they are the center of the universe, and it's just an absurdity when you really step back and look at that. My body is not going to exist in the fairly near future, and I think what we are facing is evil, incredible evil. And why would a benevolent creator allow evil to exist? Well, I think the answer is that you only come to realize that you have your spiritual being is this vast, infinite thing. You know, I used to think, well, do I have a soul? Do I have a spirit? It's in my body somewhere. And it was pointed out, no, your spirit has a body. Your spiritual existence is much larger than your body. Your body will soon be gone. And the only way that people come to realize that, I used to think, well, is it suffering that does that? If we've suffered, that we realize that we have a spiritual existence. I think it's actually evil that does that. It's when you realize that you're facing that, you somehow transcend your physical existence.
And theories now coming out that the conscious mind separate from the body, and does that live on after death? And I know that's a whole other segment for another time, David.
Well, yes, there are people that don't want to think about the possibility of consciousness and the spiritual layer, but it's real. It's real. It is speculating about the spiritual existence. There's also a possibility of direct experience of that, and that comes about through I think having to confront this evil.
Well, we wish you incredible luck with fighting the evil you're up against here, David. Something tells me you will be successful.
Well, it's happening. I want to say to people again, these actions in the States, this is real. The train has left the station. Get on board. And this is our opportunity. And please go to truenorthpublicpolicy.com.
There you go.
We need you to support all of these brave legislators. This is the way to do it. This isn't like donating to other things to make yourself feel good about yourself. This is a miracle happening. We all have to get behind this.
Well said. We'll fire up the link here on the screen so folks can check that out. On behalf of my audience, thank you for the good work you're doing, David. If you haven't read The Great Taking, I urge everyone to do so. David, thank you so much. Happy holidays, season's greetings, Merry Christmas. Thank you for joining us, and let's hope for the best in 2025.
Yes, it's going to be an interesting year.
Thank you all for watching. We're just starting our Outlook 2025. We have more incredible guests coming on the show, so you're not going to want to miss any one of these incredible conversations that you wouldn't hear anywhere else. So be sure to sign up at danielacambone.com and subscribe to our YouTube channel so you will get notified as soon as they land on the page. David, thank you again, and thank you all for watching. Gold prices are now back up after taking a breather following the win from President-elect Trump. Many thinking, well, now that there's euphoria back in the markets, maybe now is not the time I should be buying gold. Well, I'm here to tell you that if you track history, it will prove time and time again that the longer you wait, the more you will generally pay for your gold. So that's why I urge you all to reach out to one of my colleagues at ITM Trading via a Calendly link. You can find that below in video, and they will walk you through all the fundamentals and the main pillars, the reasons you should be owning gold today. Do it now.